Hey guys, I'm Jackson Rollo, the host of the One and Done podcast. We're super excited to release season 3, and in season 3, we're going to be rolling out a new theme to the podcast. So over the first 2 years, our theme has been interviewing younger, successful people in any white-collar business, really just trying to teach our college students and anybody out there trying to figure out what they want to do at a young age, what businesses exist. With season 3, we're taking it a level deeper, and we're going to be interviewing people who are either co-founders or C-level executives at a very young age. So going from what they're doing in business to really showing that pinnacle of success, what it looks like to run a company, to found a company, the struggles of an entrepreneur, and what it looks like to grow a business and to lead people. We're super excited, and we want to welcome you to season 3 of the One and Done podcast. All right, everybody, welcome back to another season of the One and Done podcast, season 3. Episode 3. We're here with Jackson Fregeau. I think I got it right, Jackson?
You got it.
All right. Was practicing earlier. Jackson Fregeau, he's the co-founder and CEO of Quandry. In season 3, like we've been saying all along, this is more about getting you with the higher level people, some young guys who are founders, who are C-level executives, and just having high level business conversations, showing you what it's like whenever you get to that next level of business. So Jackson, man, thank you for joining. I know me and you go back to some business of our own in the insurance world, but excited to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's early for you, right? What is it 7 right now?
It is. It is just after 7 a.m. But
yeah, I was
getting longer up here in Canada, so it's not bad. Sun's up.
There you go. I better say it looks bright, so you're good to go, man.
Yeah.
No, hey, give the listeners a little bit of your background. I know, like I said, me and you, we work together a little bit in the business right now, and been very impressed with the little time we've known each other, and what I've known about you. But give the listeners a little bit of your background and kind of your story.
Yeah, so kind of background on me or on the company?
Give it a little bit of both. Tell us about you, and then tell us about the company, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So I grew up in a small town in northwestern Ontario, a town called Kenora. Beautiful town around a lot of big, beautiful lakes, which is really where I spent my time growing up. We had a cabin on the lake where I spent like all my summers. I've got 2 brothers, so I grew up with my brothers down there, and went to high school there. Played fairly competitive hockey growing up, and then decided I wanted to go to university, and ended up doing my undergrad out in Calgary. I was always really interested in entrepreneurship and business. Didn't really know when going to school, like how you turn that into something at that point though. And like growing up in a small town, you don't actually have it's not a ton of models of like entrepreneurship. There's, people who like run their own construction company, or then there's sort of the like sole proprietors. There's there's the lawyers, there's the doctors, or like there's the insurance brokers. But I didn't really see like a model of like entrepreneurship.
Creating something new, right?
Yeah, that I wanted to be. So I did a finance degree. I liked math, went and did that, and then worked for sort of as I was going through my finance degree, realized, that wasn't what I wanted to do, and really what I wanted to do was sort of startups and entrepreneurship. So I went and worked for a startup right out of school. We were basically 3 employees. I was the third employee, and my title was like operations manager or something, but I was effectively like the EA to the CEO, right? I wanted to just go work with somebody who was building a company. I wanted to be right there. So I was, writing process documents. I was doing financial modeling. I started, budgeting, and then I started hiring people. Then I started managing clients. So ended up being
CFO, HR manager, everything you got to be in a small company, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. Kind of doing it all, and ended up being the COO there after about a year and a half. And we built a good little business. Like we got to we were about 35 employees or so by the time I left. We had a good customer base. But I was at this point really interested in doing something on my own. Had done it for a few years there. I had a great mentor who taught me a lot, gave me a lot of autonomy and opportunity. And I really got to see firsthand like how to build a business, but without my money, right? With somebody else's money. And, I didn't have an ownership stake or equity or anything like that.
Best way to start entrepreneurship, right?
It is. Like that's your MBA, right? Is actually doing it and learning. So then I was kind of having that. I'm like, you know what? I think I can do this. Like, why am I doing it for somebody else? Like, I think I can do it for myself. And my brother Jameson, he was finishing up his software engineering degree, and at that company, I had built an automation program to automate a lot of the work that my operations team had been doing. And that worked pretty well. And, was looking around at sort of different businesses that I knew and other friends in businesses and those types of things, and didn't see anybody using this type of technology, but saw how valuable it would be for basically, and basically this is kind of spinning into what we do at Quandri, but effectively like robots as a service is really what we do. And to explain that a little bit more, basically software robots sort of on demand to solve problems of high volume, repetitive manual work in systems that don't have great API access is sort of what we're doing. So anyways,
So is it RPA essentially? I've heard that term thrown around recently. Is that like what is it, robot for process automation or something like that? Is that what you guys build essentially?
yeah, so it's actually shifted a little bit over the last few years. So that's how we started, right? We were vertical RPA, so robotic process automation. Vertical just meaning, focusing on a single vertical. Our vertical being, insurance, which is obviously how you and I know each other. So started off doing sort of vertical RPA, so kind of productized robots to solve, these repetitive problems. Over the last few years, that's shifted a little bit, where now we utilize a lot more. So we utilize machine learning, we use OCR, we use a lot sort of more advanced technologies as well, where the RPA is kind of the hands and feet. And then, we're extracting the data, analyzing it, recommending decisions back on that. So what we call it is more intelligent automation than RPA at this point. But yeah, that's in
So
essence what we
IA,
do.
not AI.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Man, no, that's really cool. That's a great background. Just kind of recap. So we always talk about this on the first two seasons of One and Done, but I always tell people, like, if you're young and you want to excel in a business, solve problems. And it sounds like you basically started in a business, had to have your hands in lots of different things, HR, finance, operations, and you basically found problems. You found a way to solve them through automation, and then that ended up turning into a business, and now you are a founder and a CEO of your own company. Does that sound about right?
That's pretty right. Yeah, and I think like early on in that first business I was in, like the reason I got so much opportunity is because I wanted to solve problems, right? Like I took on whatever my boss wanted to give me. I worked really hard to solve that and like did all the stuff that he didn't want to do or couldn't do, and helped him do that. And that gives you more opportunity.
It does, and let's talk about that for just a minute, because I'm not really sure actually where problem solving comes from. I'm not sure if it's something that you're maybe trained on early on in your childhood. I'm not sure if it's something that maybe it just, if you're creative and it piques your interest or something like that. For you, where do you think that comes from? Where do you think like that desire to solve problems comes from? Because that's something that like I tell every college student, like, figure out a way to solve problems. And we're just ingrained sometimes through traditional universities and stuff to answer questions. But answering questions is not solving problems. It can be, but it's not always. You have to get better at asking questions than answering them. So where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's probably a couple pieces to it. Like I think autonomy and confidence are actually part of it, as is critical thinking. And the reason why, like, I think sometimes people feel like they don't have the confidence to solve a problem, that they like need to go to somebody who's got more experience or more authority to answer that thing for them. And I think what you learn, like one thing that I learned is that anybody who's been successful doing something, they had no idea what they were doing when they started, and they have a bit more of an idea now,
Yep,
but they do not have it figured out, right?
absolutely.
Like everybody's kind of figuring it out as they go, and once you realize that, you just realize that like it's on you to figure out what those problems are and how to solve them, and you need to have like the confidence to believe in yourself to be able to do it. So I think for me, that's like, I mean, number one is my parents. Like, my parents are incredible. You know, pushed us, but not in like not at all in an aggressive way. gave us lots of autonomy and independence to like make our own decisions, taught us critical thinking. So I think it sort of starts there. And I had some amazing teachers as well who I think back on. Like one in particular, I remember my physics teacher in high school who forced you to think, right? Like you would go to him with a problem, and he would just Socratic method you. He would, you'd ask him a question, and he'd, ask you a question back, and then you'd answer his question, and he'd ask you another question,
Yep.
and he wouldn't answer anything, and he would just lead you to showing you that you could actually solve the problem,
Right.
right?
Stop
And then
looking for
you'd be
the
able,
answers, start asking the questions. Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and one of the things I wanted to get into is like some early inspirations for you. I know you mentioned you like to read, so I'd be interested to hear some of the books that maybe were inspiring you to become an entrepreneur. But one of the probably the craziest things when you're running a business, I don't know if it's for you, I know it is for me, is that you have to set the direction and the pace, and you spend so much of your time looking 6 months, 12 months into the future, 5 years into the future, 10 years into the future if you're doing it the right way. That sometimes you have to just be reminded to be present in the moment. Not looking backward for mistakes to avoid or not looking forward for opportunities to attack, but just kind of being okay with what's going on right then and there. There's a balance to everything in life, but what are some of those inspirations for you that kind of keep you going, keep Quandary moving forward? What are those things that kind of drove you to want to be an entrepreneur and to ask those questions to solve those problems?
Yeah, happy to dig into that. And I think that point you brought up is really interesting and probably worth coming back to, because I've been thinking about that a lot recently, of like focusing on the present and how to manage that properly. But for me, the biggest inspirations for me were books, to do what we're doing. I love to read. My whole family does, and I was really inspired by a lot of biographies, biographies of entrepreneurs, biographies of other great people who've done amazing things. I think my favorite, it's actually an autobiography, not a biography, but Nelson Mandela autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, one of the most amazing books I've ever read. Presidential biographies, people who've done or accomplished amazing things, entrepreneurial bios like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, those stories. And I think what those show you is that anybody who goes and does these things, like, yes, they're smart, yes, they're capable, but they're not really all that different from you or I,
Right.
right? What
Yep.
they've done is they've like put it on the line, and they've chosen to go down this path, and they've chosen to take risk, and they've chosen to like bet on themselves.
Yeah, believe in themselves.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's something that you're not always trained or taught to do. You're taught to maybe stick within the system or to go find a job and work for somebody. And there's nothing really wrong with that. But at the end of the day, when you see people, I was talking to somebody earlier this week, and they're like, hey, I like to hunt, right? I've never been on an exotic hunting ranch and said, hey, where do you work? And them say, oh, I work for this place. They always say, oh, I own this, right? So the
Yeah.
freedom financially that comes with being a founder and an owner really comes with the financial, what's the opposite of freedom, that you start out with, right? Whenever you're bootstrapping it from the ground up and building something. So no, I love that. And I think there's a lot of things you can learn from other people. Like you mentioned, the love of biographies and stuff, because at the end of the day, the things that they did, you might not do those things, but you'll probably take some of the lessons and apply them to your life. And I'm sure they've helped Quandary out. Am I right on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I think the other piece is mentorship, right? Like finding really good mentors, people who are, 10 years ahead of you in whatever you're going to do. Like that's been key for my career and my
So
growth.
how
And
have
I
you?
think super important.
Yeah, talk about that. Tell me how you've kind of developed some mentors, how that's worked, how you've connected with them, and then kind of what they do for you, maybe on a consistent basis.
Yeah. So it's a combination of a few different things. Like I've always had, my boss has always been a mentor for me. So my, two previous jobs, my direct boss were both really great mentors for me. Um, Outside of that, there's a combination of both sort of formal mentorship, like we have advisors at Quandry, and those are like formal agreements. But those usually start informally, right? It starts from meeting somebody through a connection at an event, whatever it might be. And I think by being you and I are both young, and like we started the business a few years ago. Like people who have gone through their career and they see somebody who's, young, ambitious, curious, who wants to learn, people want to give back, right? So if you're coming with like an open mind, kind of putting your ego at the door, asking really good questions, like really wanting to learn from them, people want to give back.
Yep.
And then like that turning into like more formal mentorship or advisory is like that happens later, but like you're getting the mentorship early on from just sort of seeking it out and wanting it and like really, really asking for it.
Yep. And I think there's a certain level of humility too, like you mentioned. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not exactly the most fun thing ever to just cold tell somebody, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me out? Right. There takes a certain level of humility to say, hey, I need some help. I need somebody who can teach me, what I need to do and how I need to do it. And I'm looking for any advice to get better. And I think when you do that, like you said, people are open. They're willing to share. So for you right now in Quandary, right? What are like your big things? Because I think one of the things that I found to be very unique about founders, C-level members, anybody in a leadership position that has to set the tone, the pace, and the vision for a company, you always have something that's kind of on your mind, whether that's a combination of what you've been hearing in podcasts, reading in books, watching on television or sports. Like there's always something that is driving you. And I think really good founders and entrepreneurs are the ones who can take those things, internalize them, and then kind of build them out in terms of a process. So what are the things for you right now that you're just kind of thinking about as it relates to making your company better?
So there's one thing I'm thinking a lot about right now, and it's sort of interconnected from a few different things, and it ties back to what you said around kind of saying, having a longer range plan but staying focused in the moment. So, with our business, we're about 3.5 years old now, and when we started by doing sort of technology services. We were sort of building different bots in different areas. We kind of did these effectively like technology consulting with like long tail recurring revenue. And then we, decided to focus on insurance. And then we decided to build these products that we have now in insurance. But for a long time, even though we've been like very focused on the insurance agency vertical, I've felt like we've been sort of unfocused with our product strategy. And that we haven't really had a North Star of where we're going with our product strategy. We've known what we've been building in the next 3 months, the next 6 months, but it's been more reactive to like customer problems and pain, which is good early on. Like it allows you to find those problems and those pain points, but it's not going to be great over a 5-year, 10-year period. So What we've been doing a lot of recently is focus, like eliminating all of the non-essential stuff, getting rid of the things that are like good opportunities, right? That aren't like the sort of great opportunities that are really going to drive us where we need to be over the next 10 years. And making that sort of shift in focus is quite hard.
Very
Because
hard.
there's all this like organizational entropy that's
Oh
moving.
yeah, no, we're there too, man. Yeah, I mean you're fighting against your every single day, right? And I was telling this to one of my executives earlier this week. I'm like, whenever you have the most things coming at you in life and in business, sometimes it forces you every couple of years. It's like spring cleaning, but it's with your calendar, with your
Yeah.
clients. Like you have to look at it and say, all right, what of this have I been just picking up over the last couple of years that I feel like has been successful? Maybe you're being successful, but for me to get to the next level, there's going to be something here that I have to purge. And it's pretty easy when you look at your calendar. You're like, oh yeah, that doesn't have to happen. That doesn't have to happen. And then all of a sudden you have all this time to then focus on the things that are the most important. But like you said, it's very difficult to do that on your own. Like one of the pieces of advice I have for anybody who's in that situation, bring somebody in you trust and let them look at your calendar. Let them look at your inbox. For me, it's my dad. He's one of my best mentors. Our new COO is another guy for us. And I let them look at my inbox and they're like, why are you answering that? Right? Like that didn't even go to you. But there's things that we just take because we feel like we can do them the best, and maybe we can. But the best thing for the company is for us to get those off our plate and to really focus on the future. And I think you have to continually do that. And I don't think that that's something you do one time and then you're done. I think you have to do it almost every year, every 6 months, because you're just naturally going to wander, a little bit off course and have to course correct.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's like one of the hardest parts of growing your business and scaling it is scaling yourself, right? Really, really tough. Like I'm curious how you've Like, how have you approached that, Jackson? Because I know you guys, like when we were talking, whenever that was, a few months ago, like you guys were onboarding 25 people in a week. So you guys, it seems like you guys have been growing quite a bit. So I'm curious, like at that sort of pace, how do you think about scaling yourself, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's been a big thing for me this year. Like one of the things for me that's been weighing on me is just discipline, and it's not really because I've always had moments of discipline in my life. Whenever I was playing basketball all the time in high school, we would lose a tournament, and I'd be very disciplined the next like month, right? Because I was like, I don't want to lose again. But then you get in moments of winning, and maybe the discipline, I'm not going to go to the gym today. I'm going to watch some TV instead, right? Same thing in your business. And for me, discipline is about the fact that I've been in charge of, people for essentially the last 2 years. Took over basically as president of the company as 24. And I've had to figure out how to hold other people accountable. And then that leads to maybe me not holding myself accountable all the time. So for me, man, this whole year's been about discipline. It's been about wake up early. I don't like to do that. Workout. I don't like to do that. Right. Like do things that I don't like to do, because then it makes me hold myself accountable, and that helps me progress as well. So for me, I've never been a reader. Like I love the fact you said you love to read. I've read more books this year and listened to more podcasts than probably I have the rest of my entire life. I mean, I think in the month of March, or no, we just finished April. Yeah, in April, I think I put down like 30-something podcasts. Like I'm averaging a podcast a day, just because I set some time aside to do those things. And then when you do that, you just fall in love with learning. And you might be learning about something in sports, right? But the reality is just sometimes resetting your brain helps you to come back to a problem with a fresh perspective and answer it. So for me, man, it's been about discipline, saying, hey, if I don't take care of myself, how am I going to take care of my team? And that's been a big thing, because whenever I'm always pushing everything out, it's hard to reset my brain. So every once in a while, you got to pull information in, reset yourself, and then you can continue pushing out good messages, good culture, and those kind of things. How do you do it? What's your kind of approach to getting better?
Yeah, I've had to, like, similar to you, I've really tried to focus on that this year. Like, we've gone through, when you're starting out, like, when you're starting a company, like, it is just a grind. There's no,
Oh yeah, you're just trying to survive.
yeah, there's no nice way to put it, right? You're working nonstop, like 6, 7 days a week for years, and you just have to. Like, there's no work-life balance. There can't be. Like, you're putting everything you have into it, right? But then you get to a certain point where, like, that is no longer the best thing for the company. And that's a hard mental switch, because you're used to doing that. But then, like, you're maybe not making the best decisions, or you're like too in the weeds, focused on just executing. So you actually miss some important strategic decisions. And that happened with us. And there were actually these like couple strategic decisions that we missed, and it cost the company. Not anything irrecoverable or anything like that, but it was like, these significant decisions that we would have been much better off had we seen and made much earlier. And at that point, I really realized, like, I'm not actually acting as the CEO. I'm acting as like an operations manager and a sales rep and, a marketing manager and an HR manager and all this stuff. And, forced me to really think about scaling myself, and then also like how I can hold myself accountable to make sure that I am in the best frame of mind to make the right decisions, to like see the forest through the trees, and make sure that all the stuff we're doing is sort of part of this cohesive whole. And for me, one of the most valuable things that I did, like I've always loved sports. I've always loved exercising and like being in good shape. Like I care about my health. Have not at all for the last 3 years, right? It's just kind of fallen by the wayside. And I've had a really hard time holding myself accountable to like going to the gym, going for a run, whatever it might be, because there's always more work. There's always like another thing to handle. So one of the best things I did was I just got a trainer. So like I pay for a trainer once a week. And like this was a really hard mental flip for me. I'm like, I'm not the kind of person that needs a trainer. Like I know how to work out. I know how to go to the gym, but like it's the accountability. It's like I know that at 7 a.m. on Tuesdays, they're like, I need to go be at the gym because Michael's there waiting for me and I've paid for it.
Yep.
So I go, I have a great workout. And like that's just created this like virtuous cycle for me where like now I want to go for runs more and I want to be on my bike more. And like it forces me to take care of myself. And that's been really, really helpful, is like forced accountability. Because sometimes, like, I agree with you, it's hard to hold yourself accountable sometimes.
Yep. Absolutely. No, I think you got to have somebody else there. Discipline, here's the thing. That's you do that. But there's nothing wrong with putting, checks in place to help you with that along the way as you kind of build out those things for yourself. So kind of as we wind to close, man, I've loved this. This has been good. Just a lot of good information. What is your number one piece of advice for young entrepreneurs or people who maybe want to be, an entrepreneur or get into, founding a company, or anybody who's an executive or trying to work their way there? What is your number one piece of advice for them?
Yeah, I would say, if it's somebody that wants to be an entrepreneur, just do it. Like,
Start.
it sounds really trite. You hear it all the time, right? That starting is the hardest part, but starting is the hardest part. Like, it's so hard to take that first step and start something, and it feels so risky at the time. But once you start, like, you realize this after you start, where you start is not where you're going to be in a year. It's not where you're going to be in 6 months. The idea is going to change a lot. But like, once you've started, then you have something to work from, right? You have something to pivot from. You have something to talk about. Like, just getting that forward motion in place is so, so, so important. And it's going to grow and evolve from there. I think, or go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's crazy how much it evolves from there. Me and you were talking before we got on, right? And where we started 4 years ago, kind of on our growth mission. I look back now and I'm like, we were crazy. That was a terrible idea, right? But it just changes so much over time that it's the same idea, but it's had, we're at version like 11 or 12 now, and you look back at version 1 and you're like, that was absolutely terrible. I look back at some of the stuff I've done with this podcast or other things, you're like, man, that was terrible quality. But the reality is you're moving what good or successful looks like forward a little bit each day. It's that idea of 1% better, right? If you get 1% better every day, you're going to look back in 2 years and be like, I can't believe I was ever at that state. But it takes that consistent discipline to get there for sure.
Yeah, and it takes having that something to get 1% better from, right? You can procrastinate by like, listening to podcasts and like thinking about it, but like you need to act and do it. And once you've done that, you have a base to improve from. So I think that's probably the most important piece. I think the one other thing I'll say is like for entrepreneurship, everybody always talks about how much of a risk it is, right? Big risk, betting your career, whatever it might be. If you're in your 20s, so like we started Quandri when I was 25. What was I giving up? At most, like I was giving up, my savings because I had to live off that for a little while, and 2 years of salary at most, right? I would be 27 by the time, if it didn't go well over 2 years, I'd be 27 and I could get a job and I have the rest of my career to earn that salary. Like, the risk is actually, when you think of the sort of possible return, the risk is actually very small.
Yep.
When you're young, it gets bigger as you get older, right? Once you have a career and you have a wife and kids and a mortgage and all that stuff, then it's real.
Oh yeah, for sure. I got my second one on the way here soon. So yeah, I know what you mean.
Yes, you've got that. But like early on, it's like there's not really a risk. Like there is, but it's small. The bigger risk is like not doing that thing you really want to do and regretting it, 20 years later, in my opinion.
You know what? I think the one piece of advice I take from today's episode is I think that a lot of times people don't realize that every decision you make has some consequence to it. That might be a good consequence or a bad consequence or a reaction to those decisions. And I think a lot of times, like you mentioned, y'all missed a decision and that was because, you were too focused on something. The reality is you have to take some risk even along the way, even when you don't have to live off of your savings because the business is successful. You have to keep thinking that way. And the reality, the future, you're kind of building out what it's going to look like along the way. And, it's just, you have to put it in the time. You have to start. I agree with you. And if I take anything out of today's episode, man, it's when you start something, believe in it, build it with your family. I mean, how fun is that, right? To be able to do it with your brother. And I'm sure you guys have some fun family dinners, and work is in Quandary is the topic of discussion probably way too often, and you have to turn it off. But it's a beautiful thing when you have those opportunities in front of you. And I mean, you look back and say, hey, got one life to live, right? This is the way I want to do it. When it comes to work, this is how I want to do it, and this is who I want to do it with. There's probably nothing more fun than that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. You've got one shot at it, so you might as well make it worth it.
Yep. No, I appreciate it, man. Hey, thank you very much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. I mean, look, got the best name out there, even spelled the correct way, right? Jackson with the CK. Appreciate it, man. And best of luck to you and Quandri. And excited to see where you guys go in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. Really great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'll see you in a couple months in Texas, I think.
Yes, sir. See you, man.
See ya.